Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I have another Path of Exile 2 video for you guys, and it is a pretty interesting one. I wanted to kind of go over some of the things that have to do with probably one of the biggest issues in the game right now, and that is the balance between the defenses. And I think a lot of it kind of comes down to armor. And a lot of people don't understand how armor works, because they go in game and it's like, well, how much armor do I have? I have 1,559 armor and estimated physical damage reduction 26%. So basically, if I get hit for physical damage, I absorb 26 of it through my armor, right? No. The chance of that working in such a manner is nearly zero. Basically, the way that armor works in PoE 2 is very similar to how armor works in PoE 1. And I'll explain roughly how that is. But basically, the more damage that you take in one hit, the less of a percent reduction is applied. Now, the armor formula for PoE 2 is going to be pretty similar to PoE 1, but people suspect that it's at least slightly different. They said that it's slightly different. In fact, in my experience and having played the game a lot, I believe that the armor formula is pretty much identical. I think it's maybe actually identical, but in PoE 2 you can get negative armor through like the Warbringer Ascendancy or something like that, so it's maybe a little bit different in that regard. But basically, I have been playing my initial Infernalist with stacking health and armor, because that's been a typically good thing to do in PoE 1, and I hadn't played PoE 2 before everyone else could also play PoE 2, so I thought it would continue being a good thing in PoE 2. And do I still recommend that build? And the guide is still up, of course, on Mobalytics. Yes, but when it comes to high-level content, they honestly do too much damage. I don't really know how to say it like any differently. The monsters in the highest level maps in the game, they basically do more damage than armor can possibly like absorb. And now that we have like data mine info, we know what to look for, and we have a little bit better understanding for how this works. I want to give you guys a little bit of an intro to armor so you guys can see where I'm coming from with this. So initially in my Infernalist, I had about 10,000 armor, and I basically had like 25 passive points to get it. And the armor formula is pretty complicated, but the best way to really understand armor is kind of through this thing here, where it's like a chart, and you basically get to see the percent mitigated damage with your armor rating and incoming damage. So what that means is, let's say you're going to get hit for 2,000 physical damage, and let's say you have 2,000 armor. How much damage percent do you absorb from your armor? The answer is 16%. So you can see you actually need way more armor. This is a PoE 1 formula, but again, I do believe it's almost identical, if not identical, in PoE 2. So where does that max out? Well, it maxes out at 90. And because it maxes out at 90, it makes it so armor is really insane if you can basically crush the hit. If you have like tons of armor and the hit doesn't do that much damage, you'll actually reduce it by 90%. And the difference is vast, because the difference between like 80 and 90 is effectively taking double damage. Like if you get hit for 10 damage and you have 200 armor, you're going to reduce it by 80%. But if you have 500 armor, you're going to reduce it by 90%. So you take half as much. So it's just a massive difference here, right? So it's not an all or nothing setup, but when it comes to getting one-shotted, which PoE 2 is largely balanced around, that is certainly a factor. So how does that stack up? Well, it's pretty simple. If my character had about 10,000 armor, actually in Trade League, you can actually armor stack way harder. We've seen characters with 20,000 armor. So you have 20,000 armor. That is a whole lot of armor. If you get hit for 2,000 on 20,000 armor, you actually reduce it by 66%. And if you have any physical damage reduction percent, it would actually add on top of this. It would actually be really good. That armor would be really good. So how does it work in PoE 2? Is that actually making armor good? The answer is no. Because again, this is pretty much the maximum amount of armor you can get. The armor values on gear itself is much lower, and there's no aura bonuses that give you armor like there are in PoE 1. So how hard do monsters hit? Well, let's have a look here. This is one of the big bosses, and there is a hit of just about 5,000 physical damage. And if we put the 5,000 physical damage, if you have 20,000 armor, you reduce it by 44%. Let's say you have the hit, so you can maybe survive one hit. Maybe. Again, fully investing in armor, having insane gear through trade. Like an SSF, I don't think 20,000 is really a thing. Maybe you can not get one-shotted from some of the biggest physical hits. Maybe. But again, you're committing like 25, if you're getting 20,000, probably even more passive points than that. So why is that a problem? Well, it's a problem also because when you use armor, you're typically doing armor and life is also really bad. But let's dig a little bit deeper here. If we actually see some of the other abilities, we notice that Overwhelm is in the game. So 30% Overwhelm. That's kind of interesting because let's say that the damage is not very much. So you're at 90, right? But if it has 30% Overwhelm, you actually only reduce it by 60. So again, it's kind of like about half. You're not really from like the bosses, like the high-level maps, the big bosses in PoE 2, with as much armor as you can possibly have, you're basically reducing their damage by half. That's pretty much the TLDR. And the answer that I want to give you guys is that sucks. Like, it sucks a lot. All right. And I'll just kind of give you guys a little bit of understanding here. So one of the strongest mechanics in PoE 1 is to convert the damage into something else so the hit is smaller, because like if you have 20% physical damage taken as chaos damage, that means that the physical hit is only 80% of the size, so your armor is more effective against it. You're actually taking more than 20% less damage because your armor is kind of crushing the hit a little bit better. So basically, if you use Altered Flesh, if you're an Infernalist, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are, you can use it with Cloak of Flame, which has 40% physical damage taken as fire. You can actually corrupt this to potentially 50%. Even if you don't, it's 60% physical damage that you can apply your resistances to. And that's like half. So basically, if you use Cloak of Flame, you reduce the physical damage by pretty much the same value as someone who has like a maxed out armor character in PoE 2, but it costs you 0 skill points. So this level 22 armor is pretty much just as good as a fully armored out character for the sake of getting one-shotted by big hits. But a lot of the small hits, the higher armor character will do pretty well, but I would argue that a lot of the small hits, they just don't really kill you that much if you have proper defenses. Like block is so crazy with active block, 0 investment, 100% block. A lot of the small hits in the game you can just use active block against, and basically it makes armor completely worthless. But there's another angle here, and it's basically using stuff like this. Like you can see I have 3,000 energy shield and 900 life. If I equip this, I have 9,000 energy shield and 500 life. So I basically gain like 6,000 life from it. I basically triple my life, my effective health, by using Ghost Wraith. And that's kind of the best way to do it. The worst way to mitigate physical damage in PoE 2 is with armor. Yeah. The next best way to mitigate physical damage is to use conversion mechanics, largely with Cloak of Flame, and there's like a passive on the skill tree, you can help it along a little bit. And the best way to mitigate physical damage is to get no armor at all, and just have triple the health using Energy Shield. Yeah. That is that is physical damage reduction in PoE 2. And I think it's a really big problem because for the most part, Path of Exile is a game where if you really want to solve a problem, you kind of tackle it directly. And it's the first time I've seen it, especially in a game that they really tried to have some kind of fairness to these mechanics, where it's just completely backwards. Playing a life-based, armor-based character is going to work until around maps that are like tier 10. and then you're pretty much going to start getting one-shotted by everything, so your ability to progress through the new Atlas system is basically timing your dodge roll properly. And if you want to basically save 25 skill points, you can equip a Cloak of Flame. And if you want to basically just be pretty much invincible to everything, you can just use a Ghost Wraith, which is equivalent to about a 1000 energy shield armor. But instead of it being an impossible item to make, you can buy one for 1 Exalted, which you'll probably find a few of completing the first act on your first character. So that is definitely absolutely backwards. And in terms of the other defenses, there is some merit to them. If you're doing Energy Shield, it's good to have a little bit of other, kind of mitigation, so you can, splash and block, I think, is the best way. A little bit of evasion is pretty decent. But the fact that armor is so bad and Energy Shield is so good, we have this enormous skew where all these otherwise carefully balanced mechanics in Path of Exile 2 are basically just disregarded. And I want to also mention that Ghost Wraith is currently converting the life before it gets lowered to 1 through Chaos Inoculation, meaning that you can actually use Chaos Inoculation and basically have a 1000 Energy Shield armor as well. That is one of the most common items in the game. So that's where we're at. That's why you're basically seeing every single player abandon life-based characters, because they just suck, and armor is okay to have a little bit to mitigate those really tiny hits, but stacking armor to mitigate physical damage is just not a thing. I also want to add that while I think in a conceptual format, having your armor be less effective against really potent hits is kind of cool. It is weird that they actually went with the armor formula from PoE 1, while in Path of Exile 1, mechanically, it's one of the best games ever made. I would say that the armor system, even after the many revisions over the 10 years that Path of Exile 1 has gone through, it's actually still not good, even in Path of Exile 1. Because in Path of Exile 1, you basically ignore armor, or you use the Determination Aura, which just gives you a lot of armor, and you typically don't invest in it very much, other than some Ascendancies and Hyper Armor synergies. Meaning that pretty much everyone that plays the game either doesn't get armor, or gets it through the aura, which is like half of the players. I think the Determination Aura in Path of Exile 1 is the most used skill gem by a colossal margin. I don't think that's a good solution either. I really wish that they take this opportunity, because armor is so hilariously terrible in Path of Exile 2, to actually maybe rework how some of this works, because, again, I think the concept of big hits kind of crushing your armor is good, but overall, it's just not really working for Path of Exile 1 very well, and it's working terribly for Path of Exile 2. I also want to kind of add the little cherry on top there, that if you go with physical damage conversion, or if you go with just having a bunch of energy shield, you also do not get punished. If you stack armor, there's actually lots of mechanics and lots of monsters that actually break your armor, which is not good, especially because those values are actually extremely high. So even though you might have the most armor in the game possible, let's say 30,000 armor is possible, you're living it up, life is good, no physical damage is being dealt to you. I'm not going to worry about the other damage forms, just say physical damage. But then they're going to cast vulnerability on you, and you're just going to fall over because your armor is just gone. They also made a change in about a week into the game, where they made armor break debuffs last I think they went from 8 seconds to 12, or maybe they doubled the duration, I don't remember. And people are like, yeah, this is going to make Warrior so good, because now you don't have to constantly apply the armor break debuffs. Well, let me tell you a thing about these buffs that Path of Exile likes to drop on us. Whenever they're buffing something, you always want to kind of take the glass half empty approach to it, because a lot of the time the one thing that they buff only applies to 2% of players. But anytime they change a mechanic fundamentally, the monsters are also going to be affected. So currently, the much longer duration of armor break Well, that buffed the monsters that have those abilities as well, which, while they buffed Warrior's ability to armor break, they actually nerfed everybody else's effectiveness of armor. And it wasn't very good to start. So, a few things to keep in mind. I do think that we'll see way more different character builds coming out if they actually have a meaningful address to the armor problem in PoE 2. And I hope you guys have enjoyed my talk about it. See you next time.